Chris Wall grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He graduated with an accounting degree at UNC Charlotte. Chris went on to work as an accountant for his first job, but quickly realized that accounting was not his forte. He then worked for his dad, who was a serial entrepreneur, but Chris realized that he didn't like that job either. Around this time, his brother-in-law, who was working at the Capitol Hill, invited him to move to DC. Chris started as an intern in November 2002 at the congressional office in DC and fell in love with the work. What did he learn about DC politics and processes? Would you recommend going to DC to get started in government relations? Why did he move then back to North Carolina? On the personal side, if he had a choice to pick 3 famous personalities, who would he have dinner with? Let's explore into the lobbying career and personal story of Chris Wall in this next episode of State Lobbying Heroes. Hey Chris, thanks for being on the show.
Hey Deepak, thanks for having me.
Let's go into a rapid fire set of questions. If you were the governor for one day, what would you be doing?
So I have always had a passion for economic development, and anything that puts North Carolina in a position to succeed and grow jobs, I think is fantastic. So if I were governor for one day, I think I would increase incentives to make North Carolina as attractive to all businesses as we possibly could.
Excellent. Why is it important for the youth to be in government relations?
So I think as far as most people are concerned, people don't understand the impact the government has on their daily lives. I think the younger generation is becoming well more aware of that than I ever was at their age, and especially like my parents and my grandparents. But I think that if you want to impact change, and if you think a rule or a law is unfair, you need to understand how to address it. And one of the best ways you can do that is engaged in government policy.
If you were to define government relations in one sentence, how would you define it?
A conduit of information between the government and the private citizens.
Well said. What are the 3 skills you think are essential for someone to be a good lobbyist?
You have to be personable. Being liked goes a long way. You have to have the ability you have to have command of your subject. You want to exude confidence and make the elected official and your client, give them confidence that you know what you're doing. And you have to be honest. That is the one thing that you can never sacrifice in government relations, is your integrity, because once a member of Congress or a state elected official thinks that they can't trust you, that's the end of your career.
What is the hardest part about your job?
The ever-changing landscape, right? Our schedule changes literally minute by minute. And it is, somebody used the term, it is predictably unpredictable. And having the ability to adapt, and then how that impacts your family as well, because especially when we're in session, my wife will tell you, it's difficult because it's tough for her to count on me to be where I need to be at certain times because the schedule is always changing.
What inspires or motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
Oh, that's easy. My family, right? My family is my inspiration. They're the reason that I get up in the morning and work as hard as I do, because I like providing a life for them that they want, not necessarily that they need. And they're my favorite people in the world.
If you could have dinner with any 3 people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
So the first one would be my grandfather. My grandfather passed away several years ago, but he was a huge impact on my life and still is. General George S. Patton would be the second. My grandfather served as a tank commander under him in World War II. And probably Michael Jordan, just because I'm a huge Chapel Hill fan and he's the best basketball player.
Awesome. So with that, let's jump a little bit into your past. Can you tell us a little bit, where did you grow up and how was your childhood like?
So I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, fairly standard middle class upbringing. I have a sister. I went to North Carolina public school. But as most people, my parents got divorced when I guess I was maybe 16 or 17. And obviously that always has an impact as a child on you. But it was a great situation as far as your parents splitting up could go. Right after that, I went to UNC Charlotte, where I graduated. I may have taken a victory lap or two before I got out of Charlotte, but once I got out of Charlotte, I graduated with an accounting degree, and I went to work for an accountant right after a private accounting firm right out of college, and just really did not like it and knew that was not going to be my career path. And my dad was, it turned out really to be a serial entrepreneur, which I have a good bit of that in myself. We'll probably get into in a little bit. And I went to work for him, and I kind of realized that's not what I wanted to do either. My sister had moved to the Northern Virginia area to go to law school. She wanted to go to UVA Law, and she needed a year of residency. And she got a job randomly on Capitol Hill. She ends up, she goes to work on Capitol Hill. She meets what's now her husband, who is the chief of staff on Capitol Hill. He and I are very close and have been ever since we met him. My brother-in-law and I are. And where I was talking, I think it was at Christmas, and I was just kind of, talking out loud, not exactly sure what I'm going to do. He said, "Why don't you come give DC a try?" So I moved up, I think November of 2002 to Washington, DC, and I interned for a little while, 3 or 4 months, and then was lucky enough to get hired in a congressional office. And the rest is history, right? I just fell in love with it, and it was what I think I was meant to do.
So after you graduated, and then you moved to Capitol Hill, what did you learn about you getting into your first step into politics? I mean, is there anything which you felt which was something different, or what was it that?
Yes. So growing up in Winston-Salem, and even going to Charlotte.
Yeah.
Obviously I considered Charlotte a big city and a metropolitan area. That was quickly dispelled once I got to Washington, D.C. I mean, I remember I would go on a number, I can't remember how many interviews I ever went on before I got my first job. And the majority of them all made a comment how thick my accent was, my Southern accent. And, I remember walking the halls. One of the very first days I was just up passing resumes out. And I'm walking through Rayburn House office building, and there was an Armed Services Committee meeting, and you had 3- and 4-star generals and, full bird colonels walking the hallways. And I just knew I was in a different place, right? I'm not in Kansas anymore, Toto, right? And it's, again, that was where even, in college, you're exposed to a more diverse, growing up in Winston-Salem, Charlotte offered a more diverse kind of population that I was exposed to, but it was nothing like Washington, D.C. And so you really realize that you're in a different environment, and the level of what goes on there is just like nothing I had ever been a part of. So I started out I went from intern to staff assistant to legislative correspondent to legislative assistant. And then I had a different title when I was with Senator Burr's office, but mostly policy is what I handled when I was working on Capitol Hill.
Okay. And was there any skills you gained from that exposure?
Oh, absolutely. One, thoroughness, right? You need to understand the situation and the issues that you are dealing with. You need to know detail. You need to know all sides of the argument. You need to be prepared at any time when the member calls you, and really just thinking and making sure that you approach the situation with thoughtfulness rather than, you read a paragraph or an article here and you think you're the expert on something, right? That you
Mhm. So would you recommend that they go to Capitol Hill in DC and just to get an idea of what politics is all about, or would you recommend any other direction?
So you cannot experience Capitol Hill unless you're there, right? There are no courses that you can take that can, mimic or simulate what it's like to be on Capitol Hill. I think the absolute best thing for people, and it's difficult because the spaces are limited, but summer internships, go up and spend a couple of weeks working in a House or Senate office, and just you get the pace, you get the feel, you have an understanding of the everyday mechanics of how a congressional office works. Same thing in state government. I would say the same thing. If you have the ability to intern, that is fantastic, because Capitol Hill is not for everybody. Raleigh is not for everybody, but at least you have an understanding of what it means, because I'm telling you, 99.9% of the people do not.
And why would someone, after experiencing that, think that that's not their cup of tea?
Well, one, it's fast, right? Two, it's extremely demanding. Three, there's little room for error. And four, if you make an error, you show up on the nightly news. So there's a good bit of pressure. And look, and it's politics. Right? And it can get divisive and it can get dirty, and that can turn people off. Some people love it, some people don't. So I think it's you kind of have to have the mentality to want to be there for any sustained amount of time.
Mm-hmm. So you were there in DC for how long before you came over to North Carolina?
So I think I was there just a little under 14 years. I moved in, so I moved in November of 2002, and we moved back June or July of 2015. So okay. I'm not the best, I'm not the best mathematician in the world, but I think that's somewhere around, right around 13, 14 years. I worked on Capitol Hill for a little under 9 years. I did 3.5 years in the House and 5 years in the Senate.
And you were also the director of economic development, and then you went on to be an assistant vice president for government relations at National Park Producers Council. So the director of economic development, that was back in Capitol Hill, am I right?
Yes, that was for Senator Richard Burr.
Okay. And what were your responsibilities there, and what did you learn from it?
He had something that was really cutting edge, I thought, for a Senate office, and was copied by many Senate offices after he implemented it. And he put an economic development team. So usually in a congressional office, you have two teams. You've got your communications team and you've got your policy team. He created an economic development team that my predecessor started, and I took over for him. But we had representatives for the senator that covered the entire state. I think we had 5 or 6, and they had territories. And our sole focus was interfacing with business. So it was, being that conduit that, we could inform the senator on what the business community was going through, what challenges they had, what they saw as solutions. But even more so is, how do you help a North Carolina company do business with the federal government? We would hold workshops and trade shows, and one of the absolute best outcomes and kind of accomplishments that I had is, I think it was either our first or second workshop, a sock manufacturer in North Carolina got a $10 million contract with the Army. And that was directly through our workshop that they were put together. So I thought that was fantastic. And Burr had a real vision in that. That's kind of my initial economic development. I love doing that, right? That was a lot of fun.
And after you were the director of economic development, I see that you moved on to be an assistant VP of government relations at National Park Producers Council. And that was still in DC, I presume?
Yes. So Before I took over economic development responsibilities for Senator Burr, I was his agriculture LA. And working in North Carolina and agriculture, pork is the biggest commodity that we have in this state. So, and not only is it so important to the state. I mean, I think we have 25,000 jobs and $2 billion to the economy direct importance to the economy. The individuals in the pork industry are fantastic, and they are some of my absolute favorite people in the world. And so I really enjoyed working with them. And when the opportunity came available for me to go run their DC lobbying shop, I mean, that was a great way for me to take the next step in my career, but also stay very close to North Carolina and the industry that I enjoyed working with.
What was a trigger point for you to get into lobbying? Can you tell us, why you thought that would be the next ideal step, and what made you, get you pulled into that direction?
Yeah, I think the natural progression for any congressional staffer is lobbying. And the reason that is because you have relationships and connections on Capitol Hill. And that's ultimately what our business is about, relationships and connections. Friendships, relationships, you are more likely to do something for someone you know and you trust than you are for someone you don't know and you don't trust. And that is the value that we bring to people, and also just a process standpoint, right? You've got a company that has an issue and they don't know what to do. Well, let me tell you what to do, right? The first thing we'll do is we're going to go meet with this chairman, and then that bill is going to be up for reauthorization next year. So we need to work toward that. We need to get a letter going signed by multiple members of Congress or multiple state elected officials. And so that's one of the things is, not only knowing what to do, but how to do it.
And then at that point, you moved to North Carolina. Do you see any differences between working and
night and day. So I thought, erroneously, that, look, I was lobbying in DC. What's the difference? So, I mean, we're just lobbying issues. It's either a state elected official or a member of Congress, but it's still the same thing. We're still working with clients, and we're still dealing with laws and dealing with issues. And wow, I was very, very naive in that. As demanding, as fast-paced as DC is, it is nothing compared to North Carolina state government. And I can just remember walking into the General Assembly my first day, and I didn't speak the lingo. Right? I didn't speak the language, and they were using terms I had never heard of before, and I was lost. I mean, it's like you've seen that cartoon where you're just standing there and everybody's moving past you. That's the way I felt.
The process itself, or is it the people, or is it the politics? What is different between two?
The process is very different, and I think that's probably the biggest difference. The people are, for by and large, they're not too much different. But I'll give you an example. We, when I first started with my old firm, we had a fairly small bill. It was a fishing related bill about how the record keeping, and nobody was opposed to it. It was fairly simple. In DC, the way we would have done this is I would have courted an office to introduce that bill for me, probably for a month, 2 months. They would have introduced the bill. Then we would have spent the next 3 to 4 months trying to get the committee to hear it. Once we got the committee to hear it, then I'd spend another 2 months trying to get leadership to put it on the calendar. Once I got it on the calendar, then I'm lobbying votes. So we're talking about a year between the time you introduce a bill so you can realistically expect passage of the bill. That bill was introduced on a Monday. It was in committee it was in committee on Tuesday. It was on the floor on Thursday. I missed 2 committees because I had no idea that it would, because I just never imagined, right? I never imagined. I remember getting a call from my friend, said, "Hey, your bill's up and people are asking questions. Where are you?" I was like, "What do you mean? It just got introduced yesterday." So I learned by trial by fire on that one.
Oh, wow. So it's much faster pace
Oh,
here
yes.
than in DC. Okay, that's interesting to know. And you came here to North Carolina and you started working for Policy Group, am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about, what got you interested in that and what kind of policies did you work on?
Yeah, it was actually just one of those fortunate things that happened. I had a friend that used to work with me in DC that had moved back to North Carolina, who had a friend from North Carolina who was coming to DC for an event, and he emailed me and said, "Hey, my buddy just needs somebody to hang out with. Just can you go meet him for a drink?" I was like, "Sure." So I went and met him for a drink, and he was living in Asheville at the time. He was lobbying. He was commuting to Raleigh, and that's when we had really gotten serious about moving back to North Carolina. And so we're talking, and they were a Democrat firm, and I was a Republican, and the Republicans obviously had taken back over the General Assembly, and not that they really needed a Republican, but it's always good to be bipartisan in the General Assembly. And so he's like, "Hey, we're interested in adding somebody." And I was like, "Well, I'm interested in getting back home." And we kept talking, and it worked out, and it was a really great issue. I was able to keep the national pork producers as a client, and with that's a little bit makes us unique in North Carolina. Our current firm is we're a state and federal lobbying. We've still got a number of federal clients, and the issues were fairly the same. I was still doing tobacco, pork. I got into pharmaceuticals, got into some feed additives on the federal side, and then on the state side, I mean, we're just kind of all over the place: local government, technology, healthcare, education, just about everything.
You started your own firm, is that right? EQE Strategy. So
Yes.
can you tell us, a little bit about your firm and, what kind of clients do you have and what are the policies you work on?
So I started out on Capitol Hill with a guy that I came best friends with, and we started off the same congressional office, and our careers moved very similarly. He actually moved back to North Carolina several years before I did, and he eventually got into state politics. And when I first moved back in 2015, he was working for then Speaker of the House, which helped me a lot because I'd ask him 50 questions a day on what was actually happening. But I mentioned before, my dad's a serial entrepreneur. I knew I always wanted to work for myself. That was, that was going to happen. And he and I had always talked about going into business together. He left the speaker's office and then started lobbying as well. And there was just a series of events that happened in January of 2020 that, we were talking, and it's like, well, if we're ever going to take our shot, now's the time. And so we decided, what we didn't know is a global pandemic was going to hit. And we incorporated on February 21st, and the global pandemic was declared on February 25th. Starting a small business dependent on 60-day contracts in the midst of a global pandemic that's a little stressful, right? We've really been blessed. It's worked out well. One of the great things is the federal government started spending trillions of dollars, and everybody wanted in on that. So we were able to increase our business. And same thing is with the policy group. We're all over the place. We have all the healthcare, education, local government, technology. We do a lot of appropriations work. We're doing a lot of contracting work for individuals looking to work with North Carolina, just because there is so much money that's flowing through the state right now, and there's opportunities for businesses to take advantage of that. We work on everything from early education, early childhood teachers, to sports betting that's going on, and kind of everything in between. My business partner and I, we're not political animals, right? We don't work on campaigns. We're not big donors. We are extensions of our clients when we walk in, and so it's not advantageous for us to be seen as overly Republican, overly Democrat. So we like to be able to move in and out of Republican and Democrat offices, with ease, but everybody, you can look at my resume and see what side of the aisle I come down. And, the Republicans are in control of the General Assembly now. And to say that doesn't help me, I think, that would be disingenuous. It definitely does. But we make a concerted effort to build relationships with the Democrats as well. Because let me tell you, there's one thing, I mean, it may not happen for a little while in North Carolina, but there's one thing that I know is the pendulum swings. And, Republicans are in control now. We'll see them being able to control redistricting helps that a lot. But, I think in D.C., Democrats have, the House, the White House, and the Senate. I think the odds are that the Republicans will retake the House and could retake the Senate. And that's just the natural progression of things.
Can you think of any events which have particularly stuck in your head? Any funny events or otherwise?
Yeah, well, I remember the time. My first big issue when I was in the Senate, and not to disparage my House counterparts, but the Senate, especially in DC, the Senate is where legislation is written, right? They make the decisions. And it was my first big issue for Senator Burr. It was a committee meeting. And I kind of thought it went well. He had asked me a question or two that I didn't have exactly, the in-depth answer that he was looking for. But overall, I thought it went well. I come in the next day and I get an email from my legislative director, who's my immediate boss. And she's like, "Hey, what are you doing for lunch?" I was like, "Nothing." She's like, "Well, let's go to lunch and we're going to walk way over to Union Station away from everybody else." And so I was like, "Well, what's this about?" And then I get to lunch and Senator Burr was not happy with my performance at all at the committee, and I was being admonished for it. And but then I went back and I looked, and was I as prepared as I needed to be? No, I wasn't, right? And that was a seminal moment, right? It taught me, look, this isn't a game, right? This is high stakes. There are expectations of me. And as I've been told before, there's a stack of resumes this big behind me that will replace me at any time. So that was a big moment. Another just really, feather in my cap, or one thing that I'm very proud of, is we worked on to add a constitutional amendment in North Carolina in, I think, 2018. And, that's something that you can pull up the Constitution. You can see that amendment and say, I had a big hand in that happening. So that's pretty cool.
Even after facing such criticism, you took it in a positive stride, and then you learned something from it. So with that, I would like to go into the segment where you get the opportunity to speak anything about either your firm or your future, what holds in future for you, or how do you want to talk a little bit about the North Carolina politics shaping up?
Man, future. I learned a long time ago, I can't plan 2 days ahead. So, where I am, I do think that I am hopeful this is, the last job I'm ever going to have. And I'll be very honest with you. So I have 3 boys. I would love to build something that they could come into. They may have no interest in this whatsoever, right? It's a fairly unique kind of niche. It's not manufacturing. We're not, own a franchise, but it's something that, I've got a little nostalgia in that they could take over for me one day. And my business partner has the same thing. He has 3 children as well. And, that's really cool to think about, that you could pass the torch to your children to take over something that you started. I'm hoping I don't have to do this way into my, because there is a physical component to it. I mean, you're on your feet moving every day, and I'd hate to be 65 and still kicking around the building. Hopefully we'll hire some younger individuals that bring a fresh perspective from that. But I intend to be in this business for a long time. I think one of the great things about it is it changes constantly. I love that. You never know what you're going to be facing when you wake up. There is no monotony in this job, but it still gives me the ability for personal growth as well. When the legislature or Congress is not in, I don't have to be front and center. I'm not tied to a desk, which is a lot of fun. And politics in general is fun, right? That's the one thing I was telling somebody the other day. They were given an issues update, and they were talking about some specific issue. And I said, look, that's great, but mostly what people want to hear about is who's going to win the race, right? You can drone on and on about, DOT regulations or, fishing requirements, but you start talking about Senate races and who's going to win the governor's race and, what's President Biden going to be reelected, then that gets them jazzed up.
Yeah, it's so cool to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we almost consumed around 30 minutes of your time, but thank you so much for spending this 30 minutes with me. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening into another episode of State Lobbying Heroes. This is Deepak signing off. Until next time, take care.